The porch light caught her face first. Diane Whitfield, standing on my doorstep at 11 at night, mascara streaked, a handbag clutched against her chest like something she'd grabbed without thinking. Not spoken to her directly in almost 3 years, not since the divorce papers with her daughter's name on them had finally settled into something quiet between our families. "Diane?" I said, genuinely stunned. "What's wrong?" Her hands were shaking around the strap of that bag. "I had nowhere else to go," she said, stepping aside without a second thought, though no idea yet how completely that decision would reshape both our lives. "My name is Ryan, and Diane Whitfield had been my mother-in-law for 6 years before her daughter Emily and I divorced. The split amicable enough that we'd managed to avoid the kind of bitterness that sometimes poisons everyone connected to a failed marriage, though genuinely amicable divorces still tend to sever the smaller relationships that once seemed permanent. The in-laws, the family gatherings, the casual, easy affection that develops between a person and their spouse's parents over years of holidays and dinners. Emily and I had married young, 24 and 26, building a life together that felt solid for most of our 6 years before slowly, quietly, coming apart over differences neither of us had fully understood when we'd first said yes to each other. No affairs, no dramatic betrayals. Just two people who'd grown into versions of themselves that no longer matched as cleanly as they once had. Diane had been part of that marriage from its very beginning. She showed up the way good mothers do, consistently, without being asked, and with soup. She was the kind of mother-in-law who showed up with genuine warmth rather than obligation, who remembered which of my aunts I actually liked and which ones I merely tolerated, who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because Emily had the flu and insisted on bringing soup personally rather than simply expressing concern over the phone. When Emily and I finally separated, I assumed my connection to Diane would fade the way most such connections do. Not through any deliberate coldness, just the natural erosion that happens when the marriage holding two families together dissolves. For the most part, that's exactly what happened. A card at Christmas the first year. A brief, polite exchange at a mutual friend's wedding the second year. Nothing resembling an active relationship, though nothing bitter either, simply the quiet fade of a connection that no longer had a structural reason to continue. Not spoken to Diane directly in almost 11 months by the time she appeared on my doorstep that particular Thursday night, and I certainly hadn't expected her voice, her actual physical presence, standing under my porch light at 11 o'clock with her makeup streaked and her hands visibly unsteady around the strap of a handbag she seemed to be holding onto, more for the comfort of holding something than for any practical purpose. "Diane," I said, my mind still catching up to the reality of her standing there. "What's wrong? Is Emily okay?" "Emily's fine," Diane said quickly, apparently registering my first fear and wanting to address it immediately. "This isn't about Emily. I'm sorry to just show up like this, Ryan. I didn't know where else to go." Stepping back from the door, gesturing her inside without any real hesitation, the years of genuine warmth between us apparently outweighing whatever strangeness existed in her sudden late-night appearance. "Come in," I said. "Please, sit down. Do you want water, tea, something stronger?" "Water's fine," she said, settling onto my couch with the careful, contained posture of someone trying very hard to hold themselves together. Bringing her a glass, sitting across from her in the armchair I'd bought secondhand 2 years earlier, watching her hands still trembling slightly around the glass as she took a slow sip. "Can you tell me what happened?" I asked, keeping my voice as gentle as I could manage given the genuine alarm still running through me. Diane set the glass down carefully on my coffee table, her composure visibly working to reassert itself before she spoke again. "I left Gerald," she said. "Tonight. About 40 minutes ago, actually. I just got in my car and drove, and somewhere around the second red light, I realized I didn't actually have anywhere specific to go." Gerald was Diane's second husband, a man she'd married roughly 2 years after her divorce from Emily's father, a relationship I'd only known about secondhand through the occasional mention Emily still made when catching me up on family news during our own increasingly rare conversations. He was the kind of man who gave firm handshakes at family gatherings and called everyone buddy, and had a particular way of saying things that sounded like compliments until you were in the car driving home. "What happened with Gerald?" I asked. Diane was quiet for a moment, her jaw tightening in the specific way people's expressions shift when they're deciding how much of a painful truth to actually voice out loud. It's been building for a while, she admitted. Small things mostly. Comments about my spending, questions about where I'd been if I ran errands without checking in with him first, criticism that always seemed to arrive wrapped in something that sounded almost like concern. Tonight was different, Diane continued. We'd gone to dinner with some of his colleagues, and I mentioned, just casually, that I'd been thinking about taking a watercolor class at the community center. He made a comment in front of everyone about how I never finish anything I start, how my hobbies come and go faster than my enthusiasm for maintaining our household budget. That's genuinely unkind, I said. It was humiliating, Diane said, her composure finally cracking slightly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes despite her obvious effort to keep them contained. And when we got home, I told him exactly that it was humiliating, that he'd embarrassed me in front of people I barely knew. He didn't apologize. He told me I was being dramatic, that I needed to stop making everything a crisis. Sitting with that for a moment, understanding immediately why she'd left, even before she finished explaining the rest, I packed a bag in about 10 minutes, Diane said, grabbed my purse, my keys, and I just left. I didn't call Emily because I don't want her worrying, and honestly, I don't want her involved in whatever this actually is yet. My sister's out of town until Sunday, and somewhere driving around, not really having a destination, I found myself turning onto your street before I'd even consciously decided to. Why here? I asked, genuinely curious rather than questioning the decision itself. Because you were always kind to me, Diane said simply. Even after everything with Emily ended. Even when there was no real reason for you to keep being kind, you still sent a card when my mother passed 2 years ago. You still asked about me through Emily whenever the two of you talked. Some part of me just knew you'd open the door. Looking at this woman who'd once felt like genuine family, sitting on my couch at nearly midnight, clearly shaken by something that had apparently been building for far longer than tonight's dinner alone could explain, understanding immediately that whatever awkwardness existed in our unusual, unresolved connection mattered considerably less than her genuine need for somewhere safe to land. You can stay here tonight, I said, as long as you need, honestly. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Making up my guest room that night, the same room I'd used for exactly this purpose maybe twice in the 2 years I'd lived in this house. Thank you, Diane said, standing in the doorway of that small room, her overnight bag still clutched against her side. I know this is strange. Showing up at my former son-in-law's house in the middle of the night? It's not strange, I said, though privately I understood exactly how unusual this situation genuinely was. You needed somewhere safe. I'm glad I could provide that. She didn't sleep well that first night. I could tell from the muffled sounds through the shared wall between our rooms. Though by morning, she'd composed herself into something closer to her typical, capable demeanor. Already up and making coffee in my kitchen by the time I emerged for work. You didn't have to do that, I said, accepting the mug she offered. It's the least I could do, Diane said, given everything. Over that first breakfast, talking through practical logistics, whether she wanted to contact Emily yet, whether she needed to retrieve additional belongings from Gerald's house, whether she'd considered speaking with a lawyer about the actual legal complexities of leaving a marriage that had apparently been quietly deteriorating for considerably longer than one humiliating dinner. I think I need a few days before I contact anyone, Diane said. I need to actually process what just happened before I can explain it properly to Emily or to my sister or to anyone else who's going to have questions I'm not ready to answer yet. Take whatever time you need, I said. I don't have anywhere I need you to be. Going to work that day distracted, genuinely worried about Diane despite the strangeness of worrying about my ex-mother-in-law's well-being after years of minimal contact. When I got home that evening, Diane had made dinner. Something simple. Pasta, a salad from whatever I had in the refrigerator, bread she'd apparently found in the freezer. We ate together at my small kitchen table, and I remember thinking that the last time someone had cooked in that kitchen besides me was probably Christmas the previous year when my brother had visited. Can I ask you something? I said partway through the meal. How long has this actually been building? The situation with Gerald, I mean. Diane set down her fork, considering the question seriously. Honestly, probably close to a year, she admitted. It started small enough that I kept explaining it away. He was stressed about work. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was being oversensitive. That's a familiar pattern, I said carefully. I don't mean to overstep, but that sounds like the kind of gradual erosion that's genuinely hard to recognize from inside it. That's exactly what it's been, Diane said, something like relief crossing her face at having someone name the pattern accurately. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was choosing to be difficult by even noticing it. Noticing it isn't being difficult, I said, it's being honest. She looked up from her plate at that, just briefly. But the look was the kind that means something landed. You know, Diane said after a moment, Emily always said you were the most straightforward person she'd ever dated. I thought that was just a wife thing to say about a husband. I think I'm understanding now that she meant it as an actual observation. I think she was being generous, I said. I don't think she was, Diane said. We talked for another hour that evening, conversation flowing considerably more freely than I'd expected, given the genuine strangeness of our current arrangement, both of us apparently finding genuine comfort in reconnecting after years of minimal, mostly obligatory contact. Diane stayed with me for the remainder of that first week, gradually working through the practical logistics her sudden departure had created, contacting a lawyer about her legal options, arranging to retrieve her remaining belongings from the house she'd shared with Gerald during a scheduled window when he'd agreed to be absent, finally, on day 5, calling Emily to explain what had happened. Not present for that call, giving Diane privacy for what was obviously going to be a difficult conversation, though she found me afterward, visibly emotional but relieved. She wants to come see me, Diane said. This weekend if that's okay with you, given she'd need to actually come here. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. Emily arrived that Saturday, and the reunion between mother and daughter carried the particular tenderness that comes from genuine crisis, Emily embracing her mother tightly the moment she walked through my front door, both of them crying before either had said a single coherent word. Mom, why didn't you call me immediately? Emily asked once the initial emotional reunion had settled into something calmer. I didn't want you worrying before I'd actually processed it myself, Diane said. I needed a few days to just exist somewhere safe before I could explain it properly. Emily glanced toward me then, something complicated crossing her expression as she seemed to fully register, for the first time, the actual significance of where her mother had chosen to land during this crisis. Can we talk? Emily asked me quietly, once Diane had gone to freshen up before the three of us planned to have lunch together. Out onto my back porch, Emily's expression carrying genuine gratitude mixed with something more complicated I couldn't immediately identify. Thank you for taking her in, Emily said. I mean that completely. I don't know what she would have done otherwise. Of course, I said. She needed somewhere safe. I wasn't going to turn her away. It's just strange, Emily admitted. Processing that my mother's been staying with my ex-husband for almost a week and I'm genuinely more relieved than uncomfortable about it, which somehow feels like its own strange thing to sit with. I understand that, I said. This whole situation is unusual. I don't think either of us anticipated anything like this when we finalized the divorce. No, Emily agreed, a small tired laugh escaping despite the heaviness of the conversation. Definitely wasn't in the plan. Returning inside for lunch, the three of us settling into a conversation that carried genuine warmth despite its unusual circumstances. What happens now? Emily asked her mother once lunch had wound down into quieter conversation. With Gerald, I mean, are you filing for divorce? I think I have to, Diane said. I've spent the past week actually sitting with everything, and I don't think what was happening in that marriage was ever going to genuinely improve. I think I'd convinced myself it would for longer than I should have. I'm proud of you, Emily said quietly. For leaving. I know that's not easy. Over the following 2 weeks, Diane remained in my guest room while she worked through the practical logistics of formally separating from Gerald. Finding myself genuinely enjoying her continued presence in my house, our daily rhythm settling into something comfortable, shared coffee in the mornings before I left for work, dinner together most evenings. Conversations that gradually deepened well beyond the practical logistics of her situation into genuinely personal territory. I keep thinking about how strange this is, Diane said. One particular evening about 10 days into her stay, both of us relaxing on my back porch after dinner. Not the situation with Gerald. This. Us, talking like this more openly than we ever did even during your marriage to Emily. I've noticed that too, I admitted. I think we're actually getting to know each other properly for the first time, beyond just the roles we occupied during my marriage. What do you make of that? Diane asked, her tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than any particular agenda. Considering the question honestly, I think I've genuinely enjoyed these past 2 weeks, I said. More than I probably should admit, given the circumstances that brought you here. Diane was quiet for a moment, something thoughtful crossing her expression. I've enjoyed them too, she admitted, which feels like a strange thing to say given I'm essentially in the middle of a genuine crisis. I don't think enjoying good company during a difficult time is strange, I said. I think it's actually a pretty human response. Diane's divorce proceedings with Gerald progressed steadily over the following month, her lawyer confirming that given the relatively short duration of their marriage and the absence of shared property beyond the house Gerald had owned before their marriage began, the process would likely resolve without real complication. I think I need to actually find my own place soon, Diane told me, about 6 weeks into her stay. I don't want to keep imposing on your generosity indefinitely. You're not imposing, I said, meaning it, though I understand wanting your own space again. That following weekend, looking at apartments together, Diane genuinely appreciating having someone to help evaluate options, offer opinions on neighborhoods, provide the kind of practical support that comes from someone who actually cares about the outcome. The second apartment we saw was too dark, its windows facing a brick wall 2 feet away. The third had a landlord who seemed confused about which unit was actually available. Then we walked into a small but genuinely charming one-bedroom about 15 minutes from my house, sunlight streaming through windows that faced a quiet, tree-lined street. And Diane stood in the center of the living room and was quiet for a moment in a way that meant something. This one feels right, she said. The light's good, I agreed, and the street has actual trees. You mentioned trees. I mentioned trees, she said, smiling. Diane signed the lease the following week, moving into her new apartment with genuine excitement and visible nervousness about rebuilding an independent life after so many years of marriage. I keep thinking about how strange it's going to feel, she admitted, during our final dinner together before her actual move-in date, not having your kitchen to come home to every evening. You're welcome to keep coming for dinner, I said, even after you've moved. I've genuinely enjoyed these past weeks. I'd like that, Diane said, something warm crossing her expression. Our dinners continued regularly after her move, twice weekly at first, gradually increasing in frequency as neither of us seemed particularly interested in reducing the time we spent together, despite her having genuinely rebuilt her own independent household. Can I ask you something? I said during one particular dinner about 2 months after her move. Do you think what's developing between us is something we should actually acknowledge directly? Diane set down her fork, her expression carrying visible surprise mixed with something that looked like relief at finally having this conversation directly addressed. I've been wondering the same thing, she admitted, though I've been hesitant to say anything given everything about our history. I was your mother-in-law, Ryan. That's not a small thing to simply set aside. I understand that complexity, I said, though I don't think it should automatically prevent us from being honest about what's actually developing. What do you think is developing? Diane asked directly, considering the question seriously before answering. I think I've developed genuine feelings for you, I admitted, beyond simple friendship or gratitude for reconnecting, feelings that go considerably deeper than I expected when you first showed up at my door. Diane was quiet for a long moment. I think I've felt something similar, she said finally, though I've been telling myself it was simply appreciation for your genuine kindness during a difficult period, rather than examining what it might actually mean. How do you feel about that? I asked. Given everything about our history, given the age difference, given what people might reasonably think about the situation. Terrified, honestly, Diane admitted, though also genuinely excited, which feels like a complicated combination to sit with simultaneously. I understand that combination completely, I said. I feel it too. Sitting with that mutual acknowledgement for a long moment, both of us processing what we just admitted, neither of us quite ready to rush toward defining exactly what came next. I think we need to talk to Emily, Diane said eventually, before this becomes something we're hiding from her. Agreed, I said, though I imagine that's going to be a genuinely difficult conversation. arranging to speak with Emily together the following week, both of us nervous about how she might receive news that inevitably carried real complexity, given our layered history as her ex-husband and her mother. "I need to tell you something," Diane said, once the three of us had settled into my living room, the same space where Diane had first collapsed into genuine crisis nearly 3 months earlier. Something that might feel strange initially. Emily's expression carried immediate wariness, clearly sensing whatever was coming carried real weight. "Ryan and I have developed feelings for each other," Diane said directly. "Over these past few months, since I first came to stay with him." Emily stared between us, processing information that clearly hadn't occurred to her as even a remote possibility. "Wait," she said finally. "My mother and my ex-husband? You're serious right now?" "Completely serious," I said. "We wanted you to hear this directly from us, rather than discovering it some other way." "How long has this actually been developing?" Emily asked, her tone carrying more shock than immediate anger. "We only acknowledged it to each other about 2 weeks ago," Diane said. "Though I think, looking back, something had been building for longer than either of us initially recognized." Emily was quiet for a long moment, clearly working through layered emotions. "I don't know what to think about this," she admitted. "Part of me finds it genuinely strange given everything about our shared history. Another part of me recognizes that you two clearly waited to tell me directly, rather than letting me discover it accidentally. We didn't want anything about this to feel like a betrayal of your trust," I said. "I appreciate that consideration," Emily said. "Though I still need time to process everything properly." Emily requested space to think through the situation, and we respected that request. She called Diane directly about a week later. According to what Diane relayed to me afterward, the conversation apparently carrying considerably more understanding than either of us had initially anticipated. "She said something that actually helped me understand her own processing," Diane told me, once she'd finished that call. "She said that Ryan and I ending our respective connection to her, the divorce, and then whatever's developing between us now, doesn't actually diminish anything about her own relationship with either of us individually. She just needed time to separate those threads in her own mind." "That's a remarkably mature perspective," I said. "She's always been more emotionally intelligent than she probably gets credit for," Diane said, genuine pride evident in her voice. Emily invited us both to dinner about 3 weeks after our initial disclosure, her demeanor considerably warmer than the earlier tense conversation had suggested might be possible. "I want to be honest," Emily said, once we'd settled into dinner together. "This situation still feels somewhat unusual to me. I don't think that feeling will completely disappear immediately. But I've also watched how genuinely happy you both seem, and I don't see anything resembling inappropriate rebound behavior connecting back to my own marriage with Ryan." "Thank you for being open to that perspective," Diane said. "Honestly," Emily continued, "neither of you has ever been dishonest with me. Not during my marriage to Ryan, not during the divorce, and not now. That actually matters to me more than I expected it to when I was trying to figure out how I felt about all of this." Dinner wound down into warmer territory after that, the three of us finding something that felt not normal, not yet, but real. A beginning. Diane's sister Carol, learning about our developing relationship shortly after Emily's acceptance, carried her own complicated reaction, though her skepticism gradually transformed into genuine support. "I need to say something directly," Carol told us during a family dinner about a month after our initial disclosure. "This seems remarkably unusual, even by our family's already complicated recent history." "I understand the concern," Diane said, "but I'm 58 years old, Carol. I've earned the right to build happiness on my own terms, regardless of how it appears from outside. And you," Carol said, turning to address me directly, "what exactly are your intentions here? This is my sister we're discussing." "I've thought about this seriously," I said. "Examined my own motivations honestly. This isn't about proximity or convenience. I genuinely care about Diane specifically, not as some strange continuation of my previous marriage to her daughter." Carol studied me for a long moment before her posture gradually relaxed. "That's actually the answer I was hoping to hear," she said. Over the following months, our extended family gradually adjusted to our relationship, holiday gatherings and casual dinners slowly losing the initial tension that had characterized our earliest interactions following the disclosure. By the 6-month mark since Diane's original midnight arrival at my door, our relationship had settled into something that felt genuinely stable despite its unusual origins. I keep thinking about that first night, Diane said, during one particular evening, both of us sitting on my back porch where so many of our significant conversations had occurred. Standing on your porch, completely shattered, having no idea that decision would lead here. I think about it too, I admitted. I remember opening that door and just seeing how genuinely scared you looked. I didn't think twice about letting you in. I'm endlessly grateful for that, Diane said. Not just for the shelter itself, for everything that's developed since. 8 months after that original midnight arrival, something had shifted in how I thought about the future. Not in some dramatic, announced way. Just in the quiet, cumulative way important things tend to shift. Through enough dinners, enough Sunday mornings, enough moments of recognizing that the person across from me was exactly the person I wanted there. I've been thinking about something important, I told Diane during one particular evening as we sat together in her apartment, which had become almost as familiar to me as my own house over these past months. About formalizing our commitment, given everything we've built together since that first difficult night. Diane's eyes carried immediate understanding. Are you thinking about marriage? I am, I admitted. Though I want to be certain you're genuinely ready, given everything about our history. I think I'm more ready than I've ever been for anything, Diane said. You've shown me what it's supposed to feel like, not through some grand gesture, just through how consistently you've shown up. Discussing my intentions carefully with Emily beforehand felt essential, wanting her genuine blessing rather than simply informing her after the fact, given how significantly her acceptance had come to matter throughout our relationship's development. I'm planning to propose to your mother, I told Emily during a private conversation about 3 weeks before my planned proposal. I wanted your honest reaction before moving forward. Emily was quiet for a long moment. I think you should, she said finally. Watching you two together these past months, I don't see something strange anymore. I see two people who found something real despite how the beginning actually went. Are you certain? I asked. This makes everything permanent, officially connecting our families in a way that goes beyond just our shared history. I'm certain, Emily said. Honestly, I think this feels like exactly the right conclusion to everything our family has navigated together this past year. Choosing to propose at my own house, the exact spot where Diane had first appeared at my door nearly a year earlier, timing the moment for an evening that would honor the genuine significance of where our relationship had actually begun. Arranging small candles along my front walkway for that particular evening, transforming the location's original crisis-driven association into something considerably more celebratory and meaningful. The porch light was on. It caught her face first, same as always, but now she was smiling. This feels remarkably significant, Diane observed as we approached my illuminated front door together that evening. It should, I said, smiling despite genuine nervousness. Do you remember what happened right here almost exactly 1 year ago? Diane's hand rose to her mouth, clearly recognizing the location's significance immediately. I stood right here completely shattered and you opened this door without any hesitation. Exactly, I said, kneeling down on my own front step. That night changed everything neither of us expected to change. I don't want you ever needing somewhere to escape to again. I want to be exactly where you belong, permanently. Retrieving a ring I'd been carrying for exactly this moment. Diane Whitfield, I said, will you marry me? Diane's hands flew to her mouth, tears immediately streaming down her face. Yes, she said, barely above a whisper. Yes, obviously yes. Emily, waiting nearby, emerged from just inside my house, wrapping both of us in an enthusiastic embrace. I can't believe I get to be maid of honor at my own mother's wedding, Emily said, laughing through unexpected tears of her own. This is officially the strangest, best thing that's ever happened to our family. Strange seems to be our specialty at this point, Diane said, laughing through her own tears. I'll take strange, I said, if it means building this exact family. Wedding planning proceeded over the following months, our extended family building genuine excitement about celebrating a relationship that had transformed so significantly from its crisis-driven midnight origins into something authentically permanent. Diane's sister, Carol, who'd initially carried the most real skepticism about our developing relationship, offered a toast during our engagement celebration that captured something genuinely meaningful about our unusual path toward this moment. I want to say something, Carol announced, raising her glass during our small celebration dinner. When I first heard about all of this, Diane landing at her former son-in-law's door, and then everything that followed. I thought it was going to end badly. I'll be honest about that. She paused. But I kept watching. I watched Diane laugh at Ryan's kitchen table when she hadn't laughed in months. I watched him drive her to 4 different apartments and somehow know which one was the right one before she did. I watched 2 people who could have kept a polite, appropriate distance instead choose to be honest with each other at considerable risk to both. She raised her glass higher. Love doesn't always arrive through the door you expected. Sometimes it arrives at 11 o'clock at night from someone standing in the dark, asking for exactly what they needed. I'm glad you both answered. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Emily started crying, which set off Diane, and eventually me, and eventually Carol herself. For the record, Carol said, dabbing at her eyes, I was not planning to cry at my own toast. We married that following spring, on my front porch where everything began, Emily standing proudly beside her mother as maid of honor. The porch light was on, same as always. Sometimes the person meant for you shows up exactly when you least expect it, needing shelter you didn't know you'd been waiting to give. If this moved you, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe, because have you ever opened a door for someone at exactly the right moment for both of you? Next week's story starts exactly that way.